KEET-TV's Blueprint Humboldt is a 4-part series addressing local sustainability issues involving alternative energy sources, food production, business strategies, and community development. Tonight on Blueprint Humboldt, Julie Fulkerson leads a panel discussion on building sustainable communities with Elizabeth Connor from the Imagine Humboldt Advisory Committee, Kirk Girard of the Humboldt County Community Development Services Department, Jen Rice of the Redwood Community Action Agency, and Steve Salzman of Planet Green and the Green Employers Council. Coming up next on Blueprint Humboldt.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us as we continue our discussion about sustainability, and specifically tonight about sustainable communities. We've been talking about agriculture and energy and jobs, and tonight we're going to create a bigger picture. What does a community look like that's sustainable? And I'm very excited about our panel of guests. Tonight we have with us Steve Salzman, who is the Executive Director of Planet Green, and he is the facilitator of Green Employers Council, and we're going to add a few words to that, or Steve is, as we continue. Elizabeth Connor is with Imagine Humboldt Advisory Committee and is also an independent consultant around affordable housing. And Jen Rice, co-director of the Natural Resources Division from Redwood Community Action Agency. And Kirk Girard, who is the director of the Humboldt County Community Development Services. Thank you all. Your job titles are all a mouthful, I just have to say. And so what I would like to do for our listeners is ask you to, as succinctly as possible, let us know what sort of the key purpose is in your job. So why don't we start with you, Steve? Just tell us a little bit about
Sure. Planet Green is a nonprofit educational organization located in Humboldt County. We've been around about 5 years. And we are trying to bring education to the general community and to the contractors community and to everybody who's involved with infrastructure development.
Great. And Elizabeth, Imagine Humboldt. It's a great title. Tell us a little bit about that.
Imagine Humboldt, it really is exciting. It's going to be our opportunity to imagine Humboldt. And I'm a member of the advisory committee. The advisory committee isn't making decisions about what's going to happen in the planning. We're to oversee the outreach and what kind of, how the process goes. But Imagine Humboldt is a regional planning effort, so it's outside the individual jurisdictions of the county and each of the cities. And it's also vision-based, and it's a 40-year out. We're looking at what do we want the county, the region to look like in 2050. Very exciting.
Great. So a real picture of what it might be like in 40 years. Great. Jen.
Well, I get to work for a nonprofit that works with everyone in the community. It's a lot of fun. Redwood Community Action Agency has been around for 30 years. And the Natural Resources Services Division, we get to partner with agencies and organizations and landowners and private industry to kind of fill the gaps of the things that the community envisions happening but isn't maybe moving forward. So we get to do a lot of really innovative, great watershed restoration projects, regional trail development like the Hammond Trail, but all in partnership with other entities.
Great, so we'll hear more about that too as we proceed. And Kirk, your job can be big on some days, but give us the essence of your job if that's possible.
Well, I think I'm the token governmental representative on the panel. In Community Development Services, we have our building division, which issues building permits, planning division, which does planning permits and plans for communities, including the general plan. And then in our economic division, we promote development of the economy, so housing, infrastructure, business assistance. We also do natural resource work. So I lead those efforts for the county in natural resources and planning and building. And I am probably considered the principal advisor to the Board of Supervisors on planning issues.
Already you can begin to see how the weave will build here tonight, because you're all interconnected in many, many ways. So let's get right down to that word sustainable, which can be elusive. So I'd like you to tell us what a sustainable community is. You can each have a chance to do that. And Jen, do you want to talk first about what that means to you?
Sure.
What does it look like?
What does it look like? I think in Humboldt County we have a lot of what sustainability is. In general, and I polled a bunch of people from all over the spectrum from Humboldt County what they thought a sustainable community meant. And really, I think the best, most concise way it was put was just that we're trying to achieve the amenities of civilization without harming our resources or wasting them. And I think we have a strong ethic. We have a strong community fabric in Humboldt County. We have strong will for self-sufficiency. And we have a very strong tie to the land. The land is very important to us. And I think that is the foundation that any kind of effort towards sustainability needs, and we have it.
I hope you have that definition written down. That's great.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that was great. Steve, do you want to add to that?
Not much to add to that, really. That was pretty well done. I will add something to it, though. When I look at sustainability, I think of something that I would like to and be pleased to hand over to my kids, and that they could carry on and hand over to their kids. So it's really a generational thing that I look at. It's a long-term, caring for the land and for the people and for the infrastructure and making things last, build them to last, and then maintain them to last.
Really, that definition of sustainability, that it can be passed on. It is sustaining. It is
Right.
in the word.
They'll have the same opportunities that I had.
Kirk, what do you think? Would you add any other descriptive language to that word, a sustainable community, and what it looks like?
Yeah, I think so. There's one perspective that to be sustainable, you have to have a sustainable environment, sustainable economy, and then sustainable social institutions. And the trick to sustainability is do that all at the same time well. And I think in this community in particular, what isn't sustainable in people's minds is when they see a decline in some aspect of the community that they think really is hurting us. And I know that why sustainability can be a politically charged word is that people have seen a decline in our economy, and then they go over to the environmental share of sustainability and say, we find the culprit. Our interest in the environment has actually undercut our ability to sustain our economy. And so from a planning perspective, something that we do is listen carefully to people to find out the trends that they're looking at that they think are really doing our community harm. And any negative trends is really something that goes at the ability of the community to sustain itself. So I guess from a planning perspective, that's how I might define it. Those negative is also the positive trends, that if they see an asset that needs to be improved or is getting better, then that's not just sustainable. That's, hey, we're getting better. Let's do more of that. But I really think that negative trend, the decline in the quality of the environment, would be another negative sustainability trend. The decline in social opportunity would be a trend. So one thing in the general plan is, what are those trends that people are really worried about, and is there a role for government to play in reversing those trends? And that might be a functional definition I'll throw on the table.
So basically, there are the detracting elements, and what you want to focus on is what are the positive trends and the potential for the future.
Yeah, or ways to reverse the negative trends or slow them.
Can I add just a tiny fragment to that? The three-legged stool that Kirk's talking about is you have to have all three legs to, be a sustainable chair, for the society. And when we start looking at, well, we're losing jobs, so we have to go sacrifice the environment. There's two legs down, rather than looking for ways to, we're losing jobs, so let's use our environment and make it more sustainable so that we have longer jobs and bolster all three legs rather than sacrifice one or the other to keep the other one up. So
that's that optimum in the middle of working all three areas simultaneously.
It might tip a little bit here and there, but you have to have all three there to stick around.
So Elizabeth, you have a lot of hands-on experience with what a sustainable community looks like. Do you want to say a little more about what that would be for you?
Well, I think taking the broad view, I guess, and I totally agree with what others have said, and especially I agree with Jen that we have a lot of strengths in this community that we should build on to look towards sustainability. So, and unlike some other communities that have grown more quickly than we have the opportunity, well, not to screw it up.
And to learn from others.
To learn from others and not screw it up. And so in that way we sort of, we have some uniqueness in that. But I think that, the big picture is looking 20, 30, 40 years in the future, how do people get from how do they live their lives, and are their jobs and their housing closely related? And can they get easily from services and shopping work to their home? And right now, we have some real obstacles in that in our community. And whether we want to increase our public transit to get people from McKinleyville, where the housing is, to Eureka, where the jobs are, or whether we want to start putting jobs in McKinleyville, and this could, you know, this could be any community I'm talking about, but that's one of the big ones, is the job housing imbalance in the county. We want to have that balanced out in some way. And or we're going to need better transit options in between them. So we need this kind of balance in the community. And I think another thing that's very important to look at is some of, you know, sustainable means it's economically sustainable. And of course, in that context, we're not alone. We're in the state of California and we're in the United States. And so a lot of what we do to promote our regional economy and our sustainable industries, I think, has been very good. But we operate in a state and a national context, and we need to understand that. So, you know, I look at Arcata's general plan. One of the things we did very specifically in this, with this in mind, was we looked at putting, we zoned commercial centers in within every 1 mile area. And so now that's starting to happen. So we just had a new market open up under that thing. So our goal was in that plan is that nobody would have to walk more than a half a mile to a grocery store or commercial center. So that's a very concrete thing, because studies have shown that people in general, and I'm one of them, will walk about 15 to 20 minutes and not much farther. That's just how way humans are, turns out. So it's things like that. Or in Ferndale, where we're looking at, you know, that we're using the former Navy housing and turning it into an affordable housing project, and in that community. And the good news is that that housing is already near existing services and we're reusing it. The bad news is there's not much public transportation or jobs there. So that provides the challenges for us.
So there's so many elements to this sustainability. It's like mixed use, opportunities for people to work, go to school, walk, get to shopping. Are there other examples in Humboldt County that you would want to point to as where there are some good examples, either by neighborhood or by community? Just so we can begin to picture what that sustainability looks like. Hopefully we have some.
I think one thing we get credit for here is, you know, 80% of the county is covered in trees. And I know that forestry has been something we love to fight about, but the requirements to make sure that the harvesting is done sustainably has really solidified this area and its long-term economic future. And right now, we're cutting much less than we're growing. So if you think about the long-term potential for the community, we have an asset that's not being depleted more than it's being regrown, and that bodes well for managing into the future. So that's, I mean, it is a cornerstone of economy. It was a major resource issue and wasn't necessarily painless, but it is true now that our forests are being managed sustainably, and we can count on that benefit really under the current framework in perpetuity.
A really good example of that's Arcata Forest. You know, they're managing that as on a trajectory back toward an old growth habitat, and they're increasing the use of it at the same time. The mountain biking and hiking and horseback riding trails up there are phenomenal, and they're using it as an economic tool for the city of Arcata as well. So
I was going to say it's economically sustainable model. It's
and
one of the key things.
And recreation and environmental perspective. So that's a huge turning the corner for our community. If you think from it in a 20 or 30 year picture, imagine we were trying to plan 30 years ago. It would have been one of our goals, and it's, you know, largely been accomplished. We're still arguing about the bits and the margins, but it's a huge hurdle that our community's gotten over.
You know, 3 examples of really, I think, strengths that we have about sustainability. One is, I think Eureka really resembles this traditional type of neighborhood design that we're trying to get back to now, that we're starting to get in touch with what our predecessors really knew about these walkable communities, these stores that are within, you know, a mile of each other, and little neighborhood, you know, developments like on F Street and Wabash, you know, just a store, a restaurant, a violin shop, a frame shop right there, you know, that's within walking distance. But a couple of other things I think of are really compact communities like Ferndale, Lolita, that have a compact footprint and have ag land all around them. And even though Ferndale may not have all of the assets, Lolita may not have all of the assets, I think that's where we can vitalize, we can work with the assets we have and vitalize those existing communities. They have existing infrastructure. It's relatively cheap, and it makes sense for economic development to really bolster those communities. Little villages like Fieldbrook that has a store, boy, I hope that store doesn't go away, because I want those folks, I want them to be able to walk to school and walk to the store in Fieldbrook, because I think that is a key part of life in Humboldt County, is being able to live in a rural setting but have, you know, back to those amenities of civilization without messing things up.
And actually, we've got a great example, and one of the best in the country, in Scotia. I mean, this is a smart growth community. And I was recently listening to Clint Victorine, who's with the Cattlemen's Association and Humboldt Grass-Fed Beef, and he grew up there, and he was giving a talk in the Scotia Theater about how, the kids could walk to anything, and the farthest they'd go was on their bike, and the parents felt safe sending them down there, and the parents would sit on one porch and watch, 6 people's kids, because it was all, that's the way they felt about it. It was very safe and a great way to grow up. And Old Town Eureka, downtown Fortuna, and the plaza around Arcata still retain these characters. Fortuna's doing some really great things in its general plan, and this is exactly the issues they're looking at, and trying to keep the character of their downtown, get mixed use, and make sure that they're building in a way that's going to keep the current, use the current infrastructure and not build a lot more.
You know, the other thing that you just mentioned was these traditional communities, the buildings, more what you do around Planet Green and Green Building. These old buildings are built to last. That was another one of my polled responses, was that phrase, built to last, that we have strong Redwood old buildings, and there's a new move to really plan.
Rejuvenate and reuse.
Yeah, reuse, and then also our new buildings, to build them to last, to build them with a low footprint, not only a land footprint, but a low building footprint.
Right, less impact, higher performance. Something back on the Scotia model is they also generated their own electricity. Yes. They had electricity before anywhere else on the North Coast. And they continue to generate a sizable amount of the electricity we use in the county. There's a program right now, there's a study being done by SHOTS and by our CEA to look at all the renewable energy resources in Humboldt County and see if we can match the availability of those resources with our demand curve. And so what the point of that is, to see if we can match them, then maybe we can get rid of the fossil fuels and just use the renewable energies as they're available to satisfy our demand for that. I mean, that is a big step towards sustainability. If we don't have to continuously send our money out of the community to buy the electricity that we use.
Yeah.
I really appreciate how clear you're being about the components that make a sustainable community. I mean, really, all these pieces come together for sustainability. And you've given us good examples of communities that reflect some of those values. Can we look just for a moment at McKinleyville? You've done a lot of work there, Jen, with the trail system and Kirk. How do we work with communities that maybe got built quickly without some of those concepts in mind? Is it possible to redirect that?
Yes, the McKinleyville Community Plan, one of the cornerstones of it was to try to develop the town center, and that's in the area of the mall. And allow a wide range of uses, residential, commercial, pretty much whatever would give the town identity in sort of central plaza way. It's missing the Arcata Plaza and the Old Town Eureka, and almost all of our communities had
and those little
some
kind
centerpiece.
of commercial centers spread around that are more accessible.
Unconnected.
Yeah.
So to try to excite people to develop and build the heart of McKinleyville, so there is a town center. That was one of the major outcomes. The trails development, our most successful trails project is up in McKinleyville.
In the county, yeah.
I think there's interest in preserving the forest above McKinleyville, potentially for sort of multiple use community forest issues, maybe an Arcata forest in 15, 20, 30 years model. Both Green Diamond and the community is interested in trying to work out that relationship between them. So there's a lot of examples. The McKinleyville Community Plan was one of the most forward-thinking community plans that we've seen, and a lot of the ideas that came out of that planning process found its way into the countywide general plan options.
Can you address a little bit how you got there? Because you've got the most innovative trail system really running through McKinleyville. How does that work, Jen, when that may not have been originally in a plan? Or how did you get past the NIMBY aspect? I hate to use that
that's a great
word, but
question,
often with new projects there is resistance, and obviously you managed to get around any resistance.
There definitely is a vision for a regional multi-use trail network, and McKinleyville is at the heart of the model for that. And I think the reason why that's important here for a lot of people is because the highways and roads that connect our communities are very difficult in general for pedestrian and bicycle travel. But our communities aren't that far apart. So it really does make sense to be able to travel around the region by bike and by foot, but we need, infrastructure that serves us, at the human scale. And in McKinleyville, it was truly a collaborative effort of really working over time to build trust of those landowners. When trails like that exist in pieces, they don't really work for the community and they attract kind of funky uses. But around the country, what trail managers have found is that when you connect them up, then they work for everyone and they work as a transportation corridor. And we see that now in McKinleyville. As a matter of fact, my sense is the people who know their neighbors the best in a big area are the people along the Hammond Trail, because everyone who uses that trail knows people who live within several miles who use the trail. It's really fabulous to see how well they know their neighbors. And so it's become a real community asset. And I think that's what everybody I know who taught their child how to ride a bike drove them to the Hammond Trail if they didn't already live there, because we need more assets like that in our communities that are just inviting and wonderful places to be. That to me is sustainable community development, creating communities that are a joy, that are fabulous places to be, so that it's not like you have to move to the city, or if you're getting a little elderly and you need to be able to walk to the store or the services and you have to move to town. No, you want to have that community and that vibrant place to be.
Just quickly for all of you, so why is this important? Would this happen without all your hard work? What about just letting people do whatever they want?
You mean from a planning perspective? I think that when you like in the Imagine Humboldt process, you ask people what they really like about Humboldt. We are a very opinionated crew here, and we have really distinct likes and dislikes. If we can aggregate the likes, if we can really determine what our collective likes are and try to get as much agreement on that as possible, then it's much more likely that everybody that's involved in development and planning and building individual projects or individual activities will be working in the same direction. And there's a term, high-performance communities. It's not a coincidence, for example, that Apple is as successful as it is because they have a real clear vision. Everybody that's a member of Apple understands it. They're acting in concert to that. And it doesn't have to be centralized, but the more that there's community discussion, sort of agreement about the directions we're going, and less preoccupation with fighting each other, the more likely we'll have assets that we can really appreciate, and decreases in downward trends. And that's sort of a term of high-performance community. And we have a lot to preserve, and people really appreciate it. So if it's going to work anywhere, it should work here. That's the whole approach.
Well, in terms of why you need planning and why you need people looking at the future, in fact, a lot of people in the county use McKinleyville as the example. And McKinleyville is such a sort of an interesting example in the county because it's the third largest population center, but it's not incorporated. So there's other cities that are much smaller that get to join the Humboldt Association of Governments and get to make transportation decisions and get to have their own plan. And until recently, they didn't even have a community plan. So they sort of just planned, if you're not planning, it's up to the individual person who's developing that and their individual interest and what they're going to make for themselves for profit.
It's by default,
rather
than by design.
It's just their individual thing. So without planning, and so for example, even with the planning we have, and it's why I'm excited about the Imagine Humboldt, which is to take a regional approach. So for example, the county general plan, it only covers the unincorporated areas of the county. Each city has its own general plan. And there's nothing where they actually interact, except for the Humboldt County Association of Government, where people sit in a room, but that's still not planning together. The Imagine Humboldt is a chance to take this regionally. And so we can look at the question of where do we want our jobs and our housing, and even now we can sort of look at regionally, which we can't do this without the regional approach. We can look at how are people going to get from the jobs to the housing until we build them? So maybe we need to focus on the public transportation route now between McKinleyville and Arcata, and between Fortuna and Eureka, and Fortuna and Eureka. So I think it, it can point to those. But anyway, you're going to ask 4 planners why they need planning.
It was a loaded question, I knew. No, and it's hard to understand. We really would imagine you sort of address this, Kirk, that when people really understand what it's about, there is less resistance. I mean, who would be against healthy trails, access to schools, access to shopping, jobs close by, transportation? Those are all elements that we would want to have in our neighborhoods and in our communities, and that's really the work that you're doing. And you mentioned too, a building to last. And, I mean, this all really ties in so beautifully with the theme of sustainability. I guess I have just a couple of closing questions. One is, what is on the horizon? Is there a project right now that we should be looking toward, and how can people be more involved and informed? So Elizabeth, you're nodding.
Well, yeah, Imagine Humboldt, we're just getting kicked off here, so it's a really good time for people to go and participate. There's going to be some community surveys and that people can do online about get their opinion, and it will be taken seriously and inputted with other people's surveys. And there's going to be a series of community meetings in January. They'll be well publicized and all throughout 6 throughout the county. And people can go to imaginehumboldt.com to learn more and look for it in the newspaper and stuff. And other, we have a Facebook page, Imagine Humboldt, so you could go to that and find out what we're about. And so that's going to be an opportunity for people to be involved in this vision-based 40-year planning process, and I think it's going to be really exciting.
So they can come to meetings, and they can also just stay home and do it online.
That's right. They can do the survey, and they can check it out.
Kirk, what's on your list? Is there something coming up?
Well, the general plan update is in the decision-making phase. It really is in the hand of the decision makers. And the more they hear from the public when they're making their final choice of alternatives, the better the plan's going to reflect everybody's interest. So I'll say that is probably number one. There's some fascinating projects that are in the mix right now too. The Samoa project, which is a revitalization of the old company town out in Samoa, is receiving its last approvals from the Coastal Commission. We are still looking for places to put housing in the county, and there are a couple housing developments that are controversial, but it is in the effort to try to find places to put housing, various types of housing. There's some interesting energy programs. One of the most significant non-wood waste alternative energy programs is in the permitting stage right now, the Shell Wind Energy Project, and I could go on and on. So we're not only casting forward, but we have all these projects in our midst that really fit into these issues.
Things, yes. Dave, do you want to add anything to that list just quickly, 1 or 2?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing that's on my horizon, Planet Green's horizon, is the conference. We have a yearly conference, April 2nd this year. The theme this year is the next generation. So we're trying to drag youth to the table to hand it over to them and say, what do you guys want to talk about? So we're really having a push. If you go to the HumboldtPlanetGreen.org website, you'll find more information there.
And Jen, you get the last word. Anything exciting on your horizon?
I guess I got to talk about multi-use trail system, because we've got big chunks of it that have just been funded, big pieces that are in the planning and engineering final stages. A lot of it's coming together. Folks can find out more at trailstrust.org. But I would also say that for folks who really in their neighborhoods want to be proactive, you can go to humpal.org and find the Healthy Development Checklist to help you work with your neighbors to figure out what you want in your neighborhood.
I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank our listeners. Good evening.
Thank you.